donation. So thanks for joining. My name is Caroline. I am a midwife by background, but I work clinically in the NHS for 6 years, but I've since joined Fertility, which is the UK's first virtual fertility clinic. You may have heard of us. Fertility was founded in 2019 with the goal to transform the traditional stressful fertility journey into an experience that delivers a personalised fertility care. You have your own specialist fertility advisor on hand 7 days a week, and the majority of your treatment is possible from the comfort of your own home. So within our Apricity family, we have our specialist egg donation service, which is aptly named Outry, which means being selfless and for the well-being of others. As you may know, in the UK, the fertility regulator, the HFEA, restricts any payment to an egg donor. Instead, just an agreed set amount to cover any expenses during the process. Now, what this means is the majority of our egg donors often choose to donate out of the goodness of their own hearts. They're also fully aware that a child born with the help of egg donation has the choice to contact them once they turn the age of 18. So the care and support of these special women who choose to donate their eggs is absolutely pivotal as part of Apricity and Outry's principles. Now, at Apricity and Outry, we specialise in one-to-one egg donation, whereby a woman or couple, potentially like yourselves, are matched exclusively to a donor and have access to all their collected eggs, which increases the chance of having genetically related siblings should you choose to grow a family in the future. And as an Outry and Apricity family, we're committed to making that egg donation journey as personalised, supported and bespoke as possible. And working with organisations like Path to Parenthood constantly reinforces that philosophy that underpins everything we do at Apricity and Outry. We're really proud to be partnered with Becky and Defining Mum. It's a partnership based on a mutual approach to egg donation and donor conception. And we're really pleased that we're able to offer all our patients access to her community. So please do feel free to reach out to us if you would like to talk to one of our specialist egg donation advisors, either by the Outry or Apricity website, or our contact details will be on the email alongside the session recording in the coming days. So without further ado, I am beyond honoured to hand over to the phenomenal Becky, who brings some of these important topics that I've mentioned to the table every day. And I can't wait to hear all she has to say, along with her special guests. So over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. So pleased to be here tonight, and thank you to Apricity and Outry for allowing this conversation, because it is so important to share stories when we're coming down this path to parenthood. Just to firstly introduce myself, so my name's Becky Kearns. I'm also known as Defining Mum, which is where I share my story through Instagram and have been doing for the last 4 years or so. My story started when I was 27, going on 28, when I was diagnosed with early menopause, and that came as a huge shock. And we were told that if we wanted to have a baby, we needed to have IVF right away. And so we were embarked on 5 cycles of IVF with my own eggs. We had a miscarriage on the first cycle before we started to consider what our next step would be. And for us, that was egg donation. And this was a decision that wasn't an easy one to make. And at the time when I was going through this, around 7, 8 years ago, nobody was really talking about this in the public space. And so I was left scouring different forums on the internet to try and find other people that I could relate to, and I could really talk to about all of the different emotions and feelings and worries and fears that were going through my head. And that's the reason why I started Defining Mum, and also Paths to Parenthood as well, because I knew that we needed a space to be able to share these stories so that people who are embarking on this path in the future can do so in a way that is more informed, but also more supported as well. And so eventually we went through egg donation in the Czech Republic. I conceived my first daughter in 2015 and had her in 2016. So my eldest Mila is now 6, and I also have Esker and Lena, who are their twins, and they are also 5. So I came to this a few years ago where I thought, I just want to start sharing this story and see what happens. And what has happened is that so many other people have reached out and said, thank you for sharing, and also let's try and learn more. And so over the last few years, I've tried to share a number of different conversations all about the different questions we might have, many of which have been submitted today. I've also tried to bring in other people's voices as well. And a really, really important voice in this is the voice of people who are donor conceived themselves. And I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Erin, who's going to be sharing her journey with us and her story. And Erin was conceived through egg donation. I'm not going to tell the story because that's over to you. But also, I'm really delighted to have Erin's mum here, Sarah, who will be able to share her own story of going down the path of egg donation and what that looks like. I think for so many of us who are facing this prospect and the unknown of what that might look like, hearing from someone else and hearing their reality can be really, really helpful to get your head around what things might look like in the future. So huge thank you to Erin and Sarah for joining me today. I just want to say a few things before we start this conversation. The first one is just to highlight and just to say that everybody's journey is different and everybody's perspective is different. And there can be a real spectrum of responses in terms of yourself as a recipient, but also as a donor conceived person. So I just think that's really important to keep in mind today, but also to really think about truth and transparency. And that's the title of this webinar. So on Thursday this week, it's International Donor Conception Awareness Day, which is a great initiative that's been running for around 2 or 3 years now to really give space to these conversations. And truth and transparency is really, really important to me as a parent. It's something I talk a lot about through the work that I do as defining mum and my own experiences as I start talking to my girls. But it's also really important within Paths to Parent Hub as well, which is my support platform that I've created for people who are embarking on this path. So within there, we've got lots of conversations and support for you in terms of how do you start having these conversations? How do they adapt as our children grow? And how do we manage those conversations within wider communities as well? So historically, donor conception has been relatively hidden, and there's been a lot of secrecy around this in the past. I know from speaking to a number of people that the advice a number of years ago was not to tell and to say, just don't think about it again. You're a family, and that's all that matters. But what we've actually found is that these stories have started coming out. There's DNA testing nowadays, and the voices of those who are donor conceived are saying that they really want that truth and transparency. They want to know about their story from a young age, and that will allow them to grow with their story and to really understand their own identity and where they came from as well. And so the research is pointing to this, and the voices are also pointing to this as well. And I think Sarah and Erin sharing their story today will be really, really helpful for you to see the real benefits of being open and truthful and transparent about this path to parenthood. So there is the opportunity to ask questions. I do have a number of questions that have been submitted beforehand, but please use the Q&A box if you would like to. And I'm going to start with Sarah. I'm going to come to you first, Sarah, to kind of share the very beginning of this family story, the path where you started and realised that you needed to use an egg donor. And then I'll move to Erin, and then we'll come to some of the questions later on. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Becky. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so similar to yourself, Becky, in many ways, I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure, which is an early menopause, at age 16, in the middle of my O-levels, as they were then, GCSEs. And, you know, as you were saying, just completely left in the lurch. It was a letter from a doctor to my mum telling me that this had happened and I would never be able to have a family of my own, but that hopefully one day, you know, fertility treatment would advance in such a way that that might happen. And that was kind of the end of it, really. No counselling, absolutely nothing. And fast forward to my university years, when I met Erin's dad, and at 21, talking about truth and transparency, one of the first things I said to him, which could have scared him off, was, "Hi, I'm Sarah, and kind of this is what's happened to me, and this is how my future looks," you know. So, you know, very, very, very early on, very, very transparent about the situation. And, you know, down the line, we decided to stay together and we discussed having a family. And we looked at various things, I'll be honest. We looked at the idea of adoption, and we started going down that route. And then I was very, very much certain that I wanted to carry children. I wanted to be a mum. I knew that, you know, biologically my uterus was fine, and that was possible using egg donation. So we actually went on many NHS lists. We sat on various lists for many, many years. And as part of that, you know, as you've mentioned, there was no real knowledge of egg donation. There were hardly any donors out there in the UK at that time. There was no banks of donors or anything. We actually placed our own adverts in national and local newspapers. I have hundreds of adverts still downstairs that we placed. You know, we drafted these adverts out, what we were looking for, and that wasn't even characteristics. That was just, is there anybody out there who's willing to do this for us? And
wow.
A few people came forward, and they came forward to the NHS direct. And for various reasons, you know, some of the checks that had to be done, they couldn't progress. And we were at an impasse, really. And that was about 4 years of waiting. And then we decided, we did some research, and we decided that there was a private clinic in Harley Street. We'd put some money towards this, and we would try again down there. And our first donor, unfortunately, had hyper-ovarian stimulation, so she was unable to progress. And then out of the blue, one day we had a call from the clinic, and they said, you need to come down here this afternoon. We've got a lady with some spare eggs. And again, it was not, what does this person look like or anything? It was just, oh my gosh, get in the car and go down there. And we went down there, and I know this doesn't happen anymore, but at the time we had 3 embryos transferred, as happened then. And we legged it back up to Manchester that afternoon, and we had the wait to see what would happen. Fast forward to the scan, we found out sadly that we'd lost baby number 3 along the way, but we were happy to see that twins were on the way. And then Erin decided to come early. The twins arrived just shy of 30 weeks by emergency section. And yeah, Erin wanted to come out and dragged Joe along with her. And kind of the rest is history. She's still dragging him along now, I would say. But yeah, they came early.
Amazing, amazing. And he's just thinking about how things were back then. I mean, how many years ago was this when you were placing adverts for egg donors?
Yeah, so we started placing the adverts like 1995. So I guess, you know, this is very, very around the time of the internet only just starting. So there's no forums, there's no social media, there's nowhere to find any information at all. Very, very difficult in that regard. And, you know, the NHS tried, but they weren't particularly helpful either. They weren't specialists in that area. So yeah, 99 was when I actually got pregnant.
Yeah, and just tell us a little bit about kind of how you felt. You obviously found out at quite a young age that you might need to use an egg donor or go down a different route. How did you process that kind of loss of genetics and your feelings towards going down a different route?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very honest. I know this is such a personal topic for many people. I have never had an issue with the loss of genetics myself. I'm very interested in psychology, and I very firmly believe in nurture over nature. I believe it's the way we are brought up that defines who we are, and not our genetics. So that probably helped me, I'll be honest. I always just wanted to be a mum, and if that meant adoption, that was fine. But the idea that I could carry a child was really, really important to me. So I was able to deal with it very, very easily, I'll be honest.
Yeah, and like I said at the very beginning, everybody is different with this. There's no right or wrong, and everyone will approach it in different ways. But one of the things I'm really interested to hear about, Sarah, is obviously we're talking about truth and transparency, and obviously back then there was nobody talking about this, and I would imagine you didn't get advice on how to start talking to your children about it, or even whether you should or not. Tell us about those sort of conversations and how they've gone over the years.
Yeah, so Erin and I have chatted about this, you know. I didn't even discuss it with my husband, I'll be honest. So we were very, very fortunate that when our egg donor came forward, obviously they had to remain anonymous. However, they did write quite a lengthy letter describing their thoughts and feelings and their characteristics, things that they thought would be helpful to us. And we were given that. I was trying to remember, we were either given it when I found out I was pregnant or certainly just after the twins were born. And I would read this letter religiously. It kind of connected me to her. I felt very, very bonded to her. And the children were in the bath one day. They were probably just at school age, so around age 4. And I just decided out of the blue, oh, I'm going to go and get the letter and read it to them. Again, didn't discuss it with John, my husband, just said, you know, oh, I read the letter to the kids today, you know, and they were splashing around in the water. And I feel as though I introduced it very, very gradually. So I read the letter out. I thought maybe they'd ask tons of questions at the time. They were more bothered about splashing each other in the water. But we carried on doing that consistently. And this would be a regular thing. The letter would come out and I would read it to them. And over the years, they obviously started to ask more and more questions. But as I'm sure Erin will discuss with you, it just became something that was very natural, you know, and because she had given us the information, I felt was really, really important to her as well as to us to share that with them. So yeah, I think that's what we did.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I know from my own experience, we haven't got that letter or anything from our egg donor, and that's something I really wish that I had, to be able to almost like connect with her, but also to paint a bit more of a picture of her and why she did what she did. And I know we'll come a little bit later to, you have an extract of that letter that you're going to share with us a little bit later, which would be amazing. But I think one of the reasons why I like working with Altrui and Apricity is that you do get that level of detail. You are able to almost connect with that person with it being one-on-one. And I think that's a really special thing to have. And obviously we'll hear from Erin about what that's meant for her as well. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming in and we'll go in a little bit more depth soon. But I want to move to Erin now. And just, Erin, do you mind just talking to us about kind of when you first sort of started knowing that you were donor conceived and how that has been for you and the relationship you've had with your mum?
So as Mum said, I think because it was so gradual and from such a young age, I've not really got in my memory a defining moment where this revelation happened, where I was like, wow, this is something new. It was just how I always knew it. So it was like, well, that's my story. And I never even questioned it really. And I think as I got older, maybe when I started to learn more about, so I did biology A level and things like that, it was quite interesting, but I never thought back to that, like changing my relationship with my mum. Like that was quite separate from it in a way, because I'm similar to Mum in that I believe my mother is the person who nurtured me and raised me, as opposed to the egg that was used, I guess. Not to say I'm not grateful for that, of course. So yeah, I remember it just being a fact. And I remember saying to you in the past, Becky, it's something that I've actually always been really open to sharing with people. So I'm quite, the moment someone says you look like your mum, I'm like, you know what? It's so funny that you say that, because I'm not related to her. I just find it quite an interesting talking point. And I've never found it something that I want to hide or that's anything negative. It's just, that's how I was created. And that's like a fact of how I was made. But yeah, I don't even remember, Mum, you'd probably be better at this, specific questions I may have asked about it. I guess I was so young when it first got introduced. And even I was chatting to Joe before, and we talk about everything. I don't even remember us having in-depth conversations about it, because it's never even felt this thing that we have to discuss, because it's just our story, and it's not, there's not really any conflict there mentally, I guess. But yeah, for me, I just find it an interesting thing, and it defines who I am, and I'm quite open to sharing it with everyone.
Yeah, and you're 23 now, am I right? Yes, so you're 23 now, and this has been part of your life for as long as you can remember. And you've actually you've just completed your master's, haven't you? And just tell us a little bit about the study that you did as part of that.
Yes. So I did a master's in psychology, and my dissertation was very open. It could be on anything I wanted it to be. And I wanted to do it qualitative, analysing online internet forums. And I was trying to think of a topic, and then I thought the thing I'm actually most interested in and would love to help other people understand is egg donation, because I've seen from conversations with mum, with conversations with you, Becky, things like that, how much people can worry and have concerns over this. And obviously from being conceived myself and understanding that it's not all negative, I wanted to try and create a study that would show the concerns of infertile women who are considering egg donation, but combined with the experiences of women who have gone through that same experience. So I analysed internet forums and did a thematic analysis of all the concerns, put them into like a diagram, a map, and then paired them with the responses from women with a lived experience of that concern. And the overall conclusion, I guess, and I'm happy, if anyone wants to read it, I'm very happy to send it to you, Becky, and anyone can, was that a lot of these concerns weren't proportional to the reality of when you actually have children through egg donation. And I think there's so much on internet forums where there's so many concerns out there, and you might not even have them to start with, and then you'll hear someone else mention it and you'll think, oh, didn't even think about that. And there's just a lot of worries on there. And most of the women, well, all of them, it was an overwhelmingly positive response from women who have gone through it, who just say everything to do with nurture over nature, an overwhelming love for their child, a reciprocal love from their child to them. And I think it was just a really positive study in that, yeah, it highlighted the concerns and validated the concerns because a lot of other people feel the same, but also then tried to explain how in reality not many of these come into fruition. So yeah, that was my dissertation.
And that absolutely reflects my own experience and just kind of speaking with others, that at the very beginning, everything feels huge because everything is unknown and you just don't know. And that's why I think it's so important to see the realities and actually to see the relationships between mother and daughter. It was actually, for me, I remember when I was trying to make the decision and I'd met somebody through an internet forum who had been really, really supportive. And I met her with her son who was egg donor conceived. And I remember getting back into the car after that meeting and just bursting into tears because I could suddenly see what it could be like. And all of these things that were in my head around, we wouldn't bond, we wouldn't look like each other, people wouldn't be able to tell. I suddenly saw that actually they were mother and son. And on the outside, nobody would have questioned their relationship. They were just as close as any other mother and son. And that's what allowed me to see. And so I think what you've picked up on that through that study is that you often find, in a lot of women as well, I think, who have been through this and come out the other side and are very grateful to have their children, want to then help others to be able to get their own heads around this and to say, look, it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling. It's perfectly valid. And I think that's, as we come to some of these questions, I think people will realize they're not the only ones asking these things. But actually, your perception can change over time. And actually, sometimes making that decision is the biggest thing that you're going to do. But then you grow and you bond. And talk to me, Erin, about your bond with your mum, and then I'd love to hear from you as well, Sarah. I mean, you've just been on a girls' holiday together and I saw all the pictures and it looked like you had an amazing time. But yeah, just tell me about your relationship with your mum.
So I don't think, in terms of the egg donation, obviously I wouldn't know any different, but I couldn't imagine us being any closer in our relationship. So I can't see how anything would be different if it was any different. If anything, I think because of the transparency and that honesty between us from the start, the bond is just, you're okay, Joe? Yeah. Oh, sorry. The bond is just stronger. Like, I feel very open with mum. We talk about anything. When we were on the girls' holiday, we were chatting like best friends the whole time about anything and everything. And yeah, I think I completely understand the worries that people have. I can understand how your brain is filled with all sorts of things when considering this. But I think the reality is, especially in my situation, the way that we've been raised by mum is such a loving relationship that I've never doubted it for a second, that she is my mother. And
yeah, and that's so reassuring to hear, I think, as a parent, that you worry that lack of genetic connection kind of defines how your relationship will be. And actually, as you've said, there's so much more to it, and you know each other inside out because you've spent every waking moment from when you were born right through to adulthood where you've bonded. And Sarah, I'd love to talk to you about that. Obviously, there's Joe as well, and I believe Joe is in the background. Hi, Joe. But it would be great to hear from you about kind of how that bond has been for you with Joe and Erin.
Yeah, I was saying to Erin earlier, actually, I try not to talk about them as special, and I don't know how you feel about your kids, Becky, but John and I both feel that our kids are special when you, and I think this is the same for anybody who's undergone fertility treatment, when you're told as a teenager, as I was, that you will not have children, and you then have children, it seems more amazing. And I firmly believe that has helped in how we've parented them. I definitely know over the years when I would have to check myself, maybe one of them annoyed me when they were little or something, I would definitely be more patient, because we wanted them so badly. And so I definitely feel as though that's helped the bond. That has definitely created a stronger dynamic, I believe. I don't know why.
Yeah, I always feel that as well. I think it's just more consciously grateful than I think I would have always been grateful, but it's that extra level. And I think what you say there around actually sharing their story has allowed for that greater bond, in terms of, I think it just lays that real foundation for openness and trust and honesty. And also I feel that when I'm talking to the girls about it, I'm showing that I'm human. I'm showing that sometimes in life things happen and we have to work out ways to get around them, and we work out how we're going to move forward, and actually we learn from those things, and actually we can be really grateful for what happens in the end. And so I want them to really feel that we're really grateful for them, but not to put the extra pressure on that you're really special. And it's that real balance, isn't it, as a parent? But I just think what you said there is just so true, in that you do often, when you think you're not going to be able to have something and then you finally get it, it just feels all the more special, which is amazing. And I think you feel so much more gratitude for being able to parent, and actually to be able to have them. And I think that's one of the things I often think back to when I was kind of grieving that loss of that genetic child, and I look at the girls now and I think I wouldn't change you for the world. And I think it's one of those things that you can't ever imagine yourself being there until you're actually there.
Yeah, totally. And I know you've discussed this with Erin and Joe when they were both on the podcast, but I also think that it has really helped that they've had each other. They've definitely have that twin bond and that shared connectedness to anything. Although they haven't really discussed the egg donation situation between them, and it's not something that Joe is particularly bothered or interested in, it's definitely there for them. If they ever wanted to discuss it, I guess they could have lent on each other if needed.
Yeah, and I think there's that level of being open and allowing that space for them to have different feelings about it, and to talk to you about it and ask questions. And I'd love to hear probably from you, Erin, around, have you always felt able to talk about however you feel about being donor conceived, or whether you've had any questions at all?
Yeah, I definitely say so. I don't remember, obviously you forget a lot through childhood, and I can't remember my exact feelings at every point throughout the way, but I never remember feeling anything negative towards it. And I know I saw on one of the questions someone mentioned about like the teenage years, if there were any specific feelings. And I can't imagine a moment when I'd have ever, even in a big argument, have brought up anything to do with that with mum. Like I would have known myself that would have just been outrageous, and I wouldn't have believed it myself if I'd have said anything to do with that. I think in teenage years there's probably clashes with your parents that everyone will go through, and I don't think it has to be affected by being donor conceived. I think there are normal fluctuations in relationships throughout life that people who are considering egg donation think that may be even more difficult if you're donor conceived, but I don't think that always has to be the case.
Yeah, I think we always talk about this on Paths to Parenthood with Julianne, who's one of the psychologists who talks about the different feelings we have, that quite often we can velcro the fact that people are donor conceived onto all of these difficult experiences as a parent, and think, oh, well, that's because we've not got a genetic link, or that's because of that. And actually sometimes it's worth taking that step back and realizing that actually some of these challenges happen anyway as a parent. But it's not always down to not having that genetic link. But Erin, I'd love to hear from you about, obviously you your donor is anonymous. So have you had any sort of feelings of curiosity? I know that those feelings can be very normal. And kind of any sense of, as you've tried to find your own identity as like going through the teenage years and that, how has that been for you?
So I think the letter was really interesting throughout childhood, and it was only more as I got a little bit older, I think, when I read it and actually acknowledged, oh, a lot of these things remind me of me, which was quite interesting, because I think when you used to read it, Mum, I never really put it together in terms of that was anything to do with me as a child. And then as I became to understood, I think it was probably one of the most recent times I read it, and even the style of writing acknowledged, like, oh, I can understand what this woman must have been like, and like her sense of humor and the similarities to me. And that was really interesting. And Mum actually tried to get more information, right, Mum? I don't know through what means, but so we got a link one day, and it was said it clicked, and it looked as if we were going to get a bit more. And I remember having a bit of anxiety about, I don't know whether I want to click this, because I don't know what it's going to tell me, and I don't know how it's going to make me feel. And I clicked it, and it was just the same letter again. And it was almost like, oh, I didn't feel like, I was kind of indifferent to it, because I was like, would have been cool to find out more, but I'm also quite happy with what I know and how my life is anyway. So I can't say that I don't care at all, because there's definitely interest there. And like in that moment when I felt a bit nervous to open it, I thought, oh, obviously this does matter mentally for me. But I also think, I guess because in my head I'm so similar to Mum anyway, I feel like there aren't these missing pieces that I need to fill in, trying to find out where I've got certain things from. I almost feel like I am the product of my mum and dad. Like I feel like there's nothing new added here. So yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, I'll even read the letter again. I know you got a copy of it, Mum, because I do find it really interesting. I've shown my boyfriend and my friends and been like, how funny is this? She's allergic to cats too, and that type of thing. But it's never been anything that causes like any type of negative emotions within me.
No, and I think that's often another fear that people can have around, oh, if there's some level of interest or curiosity about the donor, that reflects on the relationship, and actually they're completely separate things. Having that curiosity and interest is a perfectly natural thing. Doesn't mean that you love your mum any less. And that's another one of these fears that at the beginning can be so huge, but actually you go down the line and think, actually, the relationship you both have cannot be replaced. But there might be additional things that you can get from, if you do decide at some point to find out more. I mean, have you considered, obviously DNA testing is so prevalent now that it wasn't years ago. Is that something that you might consider in the future? Or
I mean, I've not considered it till now. I didn't know if that was possible, considering when we were born through egg donation, there wasn't the same law, was there, to do with anonymity? I'm not sure, Mum. Would a DNA test be legal at this point? I'm not sure. It's not something I've considered. It's something that would be quite interesting. And, you know, I'd love to say thank you to this woman who's helped my parents and allowed me to live such a wonderful life. But I'm not kept up at night by the thought of meeting her. It's just a factor that would be interesting and I'd enjoy, but I've not really given much thought to it.
Yeah, and Sarah, I know we've spoken in the past that you've said you've probably had more interest than Erin has in terms of who she is, and actually wanted to find out more. Is that so? Tell me a little bit about your feelings towards your egg donor.
Yeah, I mean, I've been so curious, Becky, all these years. I used to sit on the tube and look at people and think, could it be you? But from a purely, as Erin said, from a purely thankful point, really, you know, she just sounds so lovely from the letter. I've always wanted to say thank you to her. So yes, I applied to the HFEA to see whether she had waived anonymity, and sadly she hadn't. She might not even know that's a thing. And I also applied to find out whether any, the reason Erin got the link, to find out whether any siblings, there were any siblings other than her own children, and no other children had been born from her eggs. So she hadn't, whether she'd donated or not, no other children had been born, which was quite an interesting thing to find out. But yeah, I've always been a little bit sad that we're not able to find out who she was or is. I honestly don't know why. I honestly think it's because the letter makes her sound so interesting. As Erin said, she sounds really cool, and it would just be great to meet her and find out some more about her. But whether that's going to be possible, even through DNA testing, I don't know. We'd have to see.
Yeah, and you offered earlier to share just a little extract from that letter. Would you mind sharing with us? Because I think it's just so amazing to have that in terms of her thoughts and feelings at the time, and it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, so the last paragraph of the letter, which is one that actually makes me break down everybody normally, so I'll try and read it properly. But I think it's important for some of the people out there to understand why she wanted to do this, because you've got to remember that in 1999, when she did this, it wasn't even that common, you know, so pure altruism from her part. There are many reasons why I've decided that donating my eggs is the right thing to do. I have friends and acquaintances whose lives have been drastically changed through infertility and genetic disease. I check on my own sleeping children before I go to bed every night, and I can't imagine life without them. The love is immense. As a girl, I took it for granted I would marry and have children. You just assume that it will be easy. I can only imagine the mountains that you have had to climb. My own family is complete, and the remaining eggs are being wasted. I don't need them, and I don't intend to use them myself. I carry a donor card that enables others to use my organs when I no longer need them. I feel the exact same way about my eggs. I've always had a desire to make a difference, and I hope I can make a difference for you. You'll never regret the difficult times you have been through in order to have a child. I wish you and your family all the best, and will think of you frequently. I just think that, you know, that just sums it up. That's what egg donation is all about.
It's absolutely beautiful. It's made me tear up, and I can see the love hearts are coming up the screen now where people are listening. And yeah, just to be able to hear from that and her intentions, and I suppose, Erin, how has that helped you kind of build a bit of a picture of her and what she must be like and her reasons?
Well, the entire letter, even the way it's written, really portrays such a nice character. And I think that's a lovely thing. I don't think you usually think just by reading words. It doesn't just say, I have blue eyes and brown hair. It's really written in a way that you can understand what she must have been like. And I think that final bit, it's so lovely to think of being the product of someone's kindness like that to somebody else. So I think, I mean, that's made me a bit emotional. I don't think I remember that bit. I think I focused on the first bit. But that's lovely. I mean, yeah, it's lovely to hear.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, really nice.
Yeah. And that, I think she's such an important part of this story, isn't she? And it's recognizing that. And I think what you've done, Sarah, is you've given the information, but you've also made her real in that sense of being able to read that letter and be able to talk about her. And I mean, just want to come to some of the questions, because obviously the focus is truth and transparency. And we've had a lot of questions around kind of talking to your child, and I'm happy to answer some of these as well, just from my own perspective of where I am now. But was it just the letter you read? How did you talk to her and Erin and Joe about that maybe your eggs didn't work, or how did you start to introduce that element of the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because obviously talking to them as 4-year-olds in the bath, they're not that aware of biology and anatomy and things like that. So I think you've got to be quite careful not to overload them with some of the detail. And certainly at the beginning, it was just a kind lady did this thing for mummy, you know, to help mummy and daddy have you guys. And, you know, and I talked to them about the third embryo, you know, I told them everything. And then I guess down the line, having studied biology at school, and then as Erin said, you know, more detail would come out, but we didn't go into that much detail. I do think that there's a danger perhaps of giving them too much information away sometimes. It was left quite vague, you know, it was the letter, it was this kind lady did this thing for us, you know, and I explained about what had happened to me in terms of the early menopause, and that was kind of it, really.
Yeah, and but then their understanding builds over time, doesn't it? So it's a very basic level at first, but then, like Erin has said, your understanding has changed over time, and you start and then you speak to other people. And I think from my own experience nowadays, we're really fortunate because there's so many children's books that we can use that can really help introduce that conversation. So my advice would always be, get yourself some of those books, get familiar with them when they're really, really young, and you can read that to them and you can have a little cry and you can practice, and they will just listen to you telling them a story, and then they start to understand a bit more. And I'm at that stage now with Mila, who's going to be 7 soon, where I'm starting to kind of just draw a few kind of comparisons between, like, you haven't got the same colour eyes as mummy and this is why, and just trying to give a bit more meaning to it. But I do wish I'd got that letter. I really do. Just to be able to say a bit more about it, because I feel at the moment all I can say is that she did a very kind thing in donating her eggs to us, but I feel very lost around the questions that might come in the future around, oh well, what's she like, what does she like doing? And it sounds, and I mean, Erin, coming to you, that just knowing that she was allergic to cats and things like that, it's just allowed you to have that more of a picture of her.
Yeah, things like that are interesting, especially when it's like things that mum and dad don't have. And in my head, it was like, I'm the only one, Joe's not got any allergies. It was like, oh, that kind of makes sense then. Or little things that she mentioned that you can sort of relate to are quite interesting. Yeah. But I also don't think that the letter, obviously in my story, it played a big role, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think with what you're saying with like children's books, that's a similar sort of focus where you're able to introduce it in an age appropriate way and just build on that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm just having a look through some of the questions now, and kind of lots and lots of questions coming in. I don't think we'll get to all of them. But we're talking about obviously talking to your child, but what about talking with others? So I mean, someone has asked, can I ask how school was for you, Erin? And how did you handle friends or comments about being donor conceived? And you've obviously said you were very open about it. How has that been for you?
I can honestly say I don't think I've ever received any feedback that wasn't positive or interested when I've mentioned that to anyone. They will be like, oh, cool. Even people at work nowadays, a lot of people will say, oh, say I post a photo of mum, they go, oh, you look so much like your mum. And the first thing I say is, oh, we're actually not related genetically. She's an egg donor. And all they ever say is, oh, that's really cool. No one's ever said anything in terms of like, oh, how do you feel about that? Because I think, especially in our generation, everyone's a lot more understanding, and there's a lot more awareness about the topic. I imagine when mum was going through it, there wasn't a lot of talking about it. But people seem to understand a little more. And obviously when I was a child, they only had the same understanding as I did too. So they didn't really know what it meant when I first said it, but they were like, okay, cool. I've never had anyone come to me with a response that was negative or anything like that. Everyone's very accepting of it. And I've only ever used it as an interesting point to tell people about myself, because I find it just not even that it's a defining feature of me, just that I think it's pretty cool that someone was able to help us like that and help mum and dad create a family, and be part of that.
And for you, Sarah, as well, obviously you, when you conceived and when you had Erin and Joe, I mean, how open were you with friends, family and people around you?
I'm probably a classic oversharer, Becky, so I will tell anybody. Erin will tell you, we'll go to the supermarket together and somebody will comment about how we look similar, even though we kind of don't really in many ways. And I'll tell the shop assistant, I have no qualms whatsoever. I don't know why. I just feel the need to be very transparent about it. So obviously family were very aware of our challenges at the time, so they all knew about the egg donation, and we told everybody. And we'll tell strangers. On holiday, Erin and I were getting called sisters, which I quite liked, considering there's a 30-year age gap. But we share that information to anybody.
Yeah, and that someone's just asked the question around kind of when people say, "Oh, she looks so much like you," or "She has your eyes." I think that starts at a really young age, isn't it? When you've got a baby, everybody comments on those resemblances and things like that. So was that always just something you were able to just go, "Yeah, yeah, we used an egg donor," because yeah, I think people have different.
Yeah, you want to be careful not to hurt people's feelings. You know, if an old lady says it to you, they might not understand, and you don't want to get into a whole discussion around fertility treatment. So I might just say, oh yeah, thank you. But yeah, generally that is the route that we would go down. And as Erin said, people are quite interested, especially in 1999, 2000, when it didn't happen that often. Yeah, they were very interested, and also. I mean, even at school, obviously they're twins. Erin and Joe don't look 100% alike. They have similarities, but they look quite different. And people at school didn't even realise they were brother and sister. So again, it was quite an interesting topic of conversation on parents' nights out and things like that.
Yeah, and I think having twins as well, I know from my own experience, you often get the comment, "Oh, do twins run in the family?" And then I've often gone, "Well, no, actually, we needed fertility treatment." So it's a common one. And I just want to say, if anyone's kind of listening and thinking, "Oh, I don't know whether I could be that open," there are different levels of being open. You can be open with a close circle of people. And I think being private is very different to being secret. And there is that differentiator there. But I think for you, Erin, that must have been quite nice just to see your mum talk so openly about it, because there's no shame around it. Or how's that helped you?
Yeah, I think the fact it's always been so open has meant there's never any doubt that it's not a positive thing. I think I completely understand why people fear telling things, just mainly in fear of their child's response. But I think if you never approach it with anything other than honesty, then it's quite hard to think, oh, this might be a bad thing, because no one's framed it in a bad way. You're like, mum and dad said it in a way where we really wanted you to be here. That's why we went through this whole thing, paid this money to have you. So that's never for me been a bad thing. So I've never felt the need to hide it. I've always felt like that's something to be proud of. So yeah, I think being transparent and open in that way has really helped me be the same amount of open, like with my friends and people around me.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think you often mirror your parents, and you pick up kind of how they're feeling about things, and I think that can be really helpful. And somebody else has asked, Erin, did you ever feel more pressure knowing how much your parents wanted you? And did that? I've heard from some people that's made it feel more pressure, and others where it's really helped them. So
no, I don't think so, because I think there was never actually much, not that there wasn't pressure put on me, but mum and dad have always been very easygoing. There's not been pressure like in school and stuff, you have to be the best ever. It's always been like letting me be who I am. So I think I can understand what you mean, pressure, because they really wanted me, but since I've been born, there's never been any type of pressure like that. So I think if anything, I just try and act in a way to make them proud, but not in a way where I'm really stressed about being the best person ever. I don't think I felt pressure because of the egg donation at all.
No. And just, we've not really talked about your dad at all in this. I know he's not here tonight, but just obviously Sarah's been very open with you, your mum. What about conversations have you had with your dad? Because it's a family story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we have spoken about it all together recently, even so, because I know, mum, they've told us more detail as time's gone on when we've asked, and just the whole story with dad involved, like the fact that he had some issues with fertility that you mentioned, mum, that he didn't know about, and then it was just this, it's like teamwork that I guess you had to go through to get us here. So dad is very much involved in the story and has always been in conversations to do with it. But yeah, I guess because me and Joe don't really think of it as this big deal anymore, or ever have, we've never felt the need to ask certain questions to dad or mum. We've always had like casual group discussions about it if we've wanted to, just out of interest. But I don't think it's really affected anything to do with my relationship with dad. That's always just been very open. And
yeah, and I think I obviously spoke with yourself and Joe for a session on Paths to Parenthood, which is still available if people want to watch. But what really came across was the real, just the openness and the easiness of the relationships within your family that have just allowed that conversation. There's nothing that anyone feels they have to hide or have to, I can't say this. It just feels very open. And I think testament to you, Sarah, and your husband, the way that you fostered that within your family. And I think particularly through a time where there wasn't that emotional support out there for someone who has conceived in this way and has to then navigate their way through parenting as well.
Yeah, I would say on that, Becky, you know, you're right. There's a fragility to parenthood, isn't there, that no one really talks about. And we're not experts. We're adults, but we're not experts, and we don't know everything, and we make mistakes. And I think what we have always tried to do with Erin and Joe is tell them that it's okay to make mistakes. And that is, you know, that is being completely honest. Come to us if you've done something wrong or if anything's happened, and we can try and fix it, but never be afraid to come to us. And, you know, I'd like to think that they always have done that.
Yeah. And I think that really, it just resonates from everything that you're saying. Sarah, someone's just asked a question, so I'm trying to keep an eye on questions as well that are coming in. Multitasking here. So someone has asked, at what point did you stop having fears about the bond between you, Erin and Joe? Was there something that happened that made you feel like there was no need to fear? And I suppose thinking about those early days as a mum or even through pregnancy, how did you feel in terms of bonding and that bond was growing?
Yeah, I always felt bonded to them until I probably gave birth to them. The only thing that I would say happened was, you know, there's the added complication of them being prem. They were born very, very early. They were in a neonatal unit for 5 weeks. Erin was a little fighter, even though Erin was smaller. Erin was fine, but Joe was very, very poorly and almost died on day J2. His lungs collapsed. So there was an element of disparity, I guess, when they were born, as happens with any parents and particularly with multiples. And Erin, as she knows well, because we tell her quite a lot, was quite a difficult baby. And there was an element when she was first born, admittedly, where I thought, oh, she doesn't like me because she's not genetically mine. And there's this mismatch because she couldn't feed properly and things. And it was actually obviously nothing to do with that. Bless her, she had some feeding difficulties because she was born so early. And I think those kind of thoughts are very, very natural. But as soon as, I don't know, she got past that stage when she started sleeping eventually, then that all disappeared. So I think it's very, very normal to have those feelings, especially when you've gone through a difficult birth and you've had preemie babies.
Yeah, and this is something we talk about a lot on Paths to Parenthood, and we talk about how attachment, it's not just like a one-time moment, it's a process and it builds over time. But I think you sharing some of those reflections where you maybe went, oh, maybe this isn't working because we're not, it's that Velcro effect, isn't it? Again, she's not feeding properly. Maybe it's because we're not genetically related or she's not responding in that way. And I've had those moments where it kind of crosses your mind briefly, but then you go, right, actually, no, there's more to it than this. And I really do feel that as a parent, your confidence in your bond and relationship just grows over time as they grow, they start communicating with you and you can communicate with them, and then they become their own little people. And yeah, you just get to know them inside out. I think at the very beginning, you're thinking about this. It's almost like it's the unknown, isn't it? It's I have no idea. It's this stranger in the future, and yet you grow that child, you birth them, you then nurture them, and they become like the closest person to you. So it really is a process. And I'm just really conscious that we've got 5 minutes left. I just want to make sure I've covered off most of the topics. So one of the questions that did come through from someone, they've got a 4-month-old baby boy through donor eggs. Congratulations. So myself and my husband want to be as open with him as he grows up about how he was conceived. Do you know of any helpful resources, and have you got any tips about where to start? So I suppose just from both of your perspectives, just tips on how do you think parents should start this conversation? And like we say, it's very difficult to say right and wrong, but how would you approach that now, Sarah, knowing what you know?
Sorry, did they say 4-month-old or 4-year-old?
Yeah, 4-month-old.
Oh, 4-month-old.
So very
Gosh,
early
gosh.
days.
Gosh, they're thinking about it very early. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't think about it, as I say, till the kids were probably at nursery. And as you mentioned, there are so many resources out there now that I just didn't have. So I think preschool age, or just before they go to school, is perfect from a personal perspective. So sort of around age 4, when they've got a bit of an understanding, but not too much. And I think just dropping in little bits of information, like you mentioned you've done with, you know, perhaps whether the eye colour is different, or the nose is different, or any of those kinds of things. Physical characteristics I would concentrate on. I think, you know, don't talk about personalities or anything like that, because from my perspective, they're not formed from genetics. They're formed from how you bring your child up. You know, don't say you've got daddy's temper or anything like that. I don't think that kind of thing's necessary. It's maybe overcomplicating things, but just introduce the physical characteristics, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think it's like 4 months. You were already thinking about how you're going to have those conversations, and I would just say use this time to practice and get used. I did actually talk to Mila whilst I was changing her nappy, and that just allowed me to get more confident in saying it out loud. And I think it's like listening to different stories and growing confident in how you're going to approach that together and tell that story. And I think, as we've seen today, the real benefits of telling early and telling that story and allowing that space and openness for that conversation to continue at whatever point it happens to come up is really, really important. Just a final question that's come through, and it's one for you, Erin. And it said, I know you said that there weren't any other donor siblings born or half siblings born, but are you curious about the donor's own children and maybe connecting with them at some stage? Because obviously from a perspective of them being half siblings.
Yeah, I must admit it's nothing that's ever crossed my mind. When you mention it, that sounds like an interesting thing to do, and it would be interesting to meet someone and think, oh, we're related somehow. But I can't help but feel like I'd probably meet them and think, oh, you're nothing like my brother, like, because we're the same, we've been brought up the same. And I don't think there needs to be a pressure surrounding, oh, you're going to meet them and they're going to fill a gap that's in your life, or you're going to suddenly think, oh, this person's my brother or sister. I think if she was able to waive anonymity, as you say, Mum, I'm not sure if that's a possibility. It's definitely something that I'd think would be interesting, but I also haven't got too much of a desire to look into it at the moment. I think I don't feel like anything's missing in my life and my family. If anything, it's just another interesting story, an interesting little facet of my life. It's not something that I feel like is lacking. So yeah, it would be interesting, but it's also not something that I've ever really spoken to Mum about or even considered, really.
You'll probably be going away from this having all of these different
Yeah,
conversations now.
like, should I go find
when you start talking about it, it kind of brings these things up. But I think it's just, this is something that it may change over time. Your interest might be spiked by a particular event and different things, or it may not. And I think there's no way we can get through all of the questions tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who has asked the questions. And I just want to say, if anybody wants to send me a direct message on Defining Mum, I'm more than happy to respond over the next few days. But a couple of people have raised about having seen different perspectives from donor conceived people, particularly online. And I think, as I mentioned at the start, there are varying perspectives and experiences, and no two stories will be the same. And so I think it's really refreshing to hear how that truth and transparency has really helped you over time. And I think for us as parents, it's also really important to listen to that range and really think about, okay, how can we be best prepared to support our children with whatever challenges they face? But I think the very foundation of this is truth, it's transparency, and that's what really, really strong bonds and positive relationships are built on, I believe. And so thank you to everybody who has joined us tonight. A huge, huge thank you to Erin and Sarah for coming and so generously sharing your experiences, which I know will help so many. There's love hearts going up and down the screen again. So I know that so many people have taken a lot from it. And a huge thank you to Fertility and Apricity for hosting this conversation. just to say that we do partner with Altrui and Apricity, so Paths to Parent Hub, which is the support platform for people at whatever stage you're going through donor conception. So whether you're making the decision, going through treatment or parenting, there's so much information on there and resources with conversations just like this, with lived experiences, but also with professionals as we look at all of those different fears and questions and look at what is the best way to talk and tell and how can we support ourselves as we go through this. So yeah, the idea is that anyone who is going through donor conception through Apricity and Altrui will have access to Paths to Parent Hub as well to support the emotional part of the journey. So yeah, thank you again. And it's been a delight to talk to you both. It always makes me smile. And yeah, I will let everyone get on with their evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.